Hi, scholars. In this video, I want to talk to you about one of the most important topics that we're going to talk about this term, and that is your self-concept. Your self-concept is your subjective interpretation of who you are. This is extremely important, as we'll talk about in a few moments. A few things to remember about self-concept. First of all is that your self-concept is subjective, which means it doesn't necessarily mean that this is who you are. This is who you believe you are. And also that because it's a sense of who you are, it's going to have a profound impact on your decisions, the choices you make, your self-esteem, your self-efficacy, etc. So, 3 reasons why the self-concept is important. The first is this is a very important source of your self-esteem or lack thereof. Psychologists oftentimes say that you can tell a lot about a person if you knew what they said to themselves. If we beat ourselves up, if we talk down about ourselves, then we lower our sense of worth, our self-esteem. And self-esteem is so important. It literally can determine things like a low self-esteem can lead to somebody not taking care of themselves. It can lead to even suicide, but also our willingness to accept abuse from others. So your self-esteem is very, very important in how well you take care of yourself, both personally in your physical health, as well as socially with others. The second is consistency. The human mind by nature craves to be consistent. And so when we have a self-concept, we will strive to make choices consistent with that self-concept. So if our self-concept believes that we're honest, we're far more likely to be honest even when it's difficult. The reason for that is if you have the self-concept right now that you're an honest person, and then you start telling lies, you know that discomfort you feel? It's called cognitive dissonance. It's an internal contradiction, and we don't like that. So therefore, we tend to strive to match our self-concept. If your self-concept is that you are competitive, you're far more likely to enjoy competition than you would be if your self-concept is that you're not competitive. So our self-concept actually governs a lot of our choices. When we think about parenting, the self-concept that you teach your child will oftentimes determine a lot of their choices when you're not around. So if they have a self-concept of that they're honest, that they're generous, that they're respectful, and things like that, they will tend to be those things even when you're not watching. Likewise, if they have the self-concept that they're rebellious, they have the self-concept that they're somebody that doesn't get along with people, then they will also tend to reflect that when you're not around. Another thing I want to talk to you about in terms of self-concept and the importance of it is the difference between a mature self-concept and an immature self-concept. Now, a mature self-concept means that the self-concept has somewhat solidified. Now, your self-concept can change throughout your life. I'm not saying that it gets set in stone, but it solidifies somewhat. It's mature. That means that for your self-concept to be changed, you have to participate in the change. External forces cannot change your self-concept against your will. With an immature self-concept, it's more malleable. It's almost like clay or Play-Doh. And therefore, even if you want to resist changes to your self-concept, external forces can change it. So mature versus immature simply means, do you have to be an active participant in the change of your self-concept? Or can the self-concept be changed without you? Self-concept, as I mentioned, is extremely important. From the time you're born, external forces are constantly trying to tell you who you are. Your parents, your siblings, your friends, your enemies, rivals, competitors, advertisers, all of these groups are trying to tell you who you are, trying to define you. And given how important self-concept is, I think you can understand how important it is that we define a good, healthy self-concept for ourselves and then defend it. So where does this self-concept come from? So here are the 5 basic strategies for building and maintaining a self-concept. The first one is called self as narrative. From the time we're born, a personal mythology or personal story begins to develop about us. Now, obviously, our youngest, earliest time, we don't remember. So what happens is relatives, maybe our parents, maybe an uncle or an aunt, grandparents, later on, they're going to start telling us stories about us. And if you get together with your family or old friends, and they continue to tell you the exact same stories over and over and over again, it shapes your personal mythology. So self as narrative is a combination of stories about us that are told to us, as well as our memories. Collectively, it tells us a story, and we use that story to try to determine who am I. Your mind is insatiably curious about itself. It's curious about who am I. And so self as narrative is one of the ways that it does that. One of the ways that it tries to define who am I by looking at the stories and then determining what kind of a person must I be. Second is self as behavioral indicators. You are constantly under observation. Your thoughts, your hopes, your fears, your dreams, your experiences, everything about you is constantly being observed by you. The human mind is constantly trying to watch itself and learn what kind of a person am I. This is based on something called self-perception theory by Daryl Bem. And the idea here, and I'm never going to ask you, for names or dates or anything like that. The idea here is in the mind's curiosity about itself and its effort to try to define who am I, it looks to our behaviors. So this is a valuable way for you to defend or change your self-concept at your choice. So if you want to be have a self-concept, I'm an honest person, be honest. Just start telling the truth, especially when it's hard. The reason for that is your mind is watching, and as it notices that's what you're doing, it becomes part of your self-concept. It says, I am honest. Likewise, if you lie a lot, then your mind is watching and saying, I lie because it's convenient. I lie pretty much all the time. And it becomes part of who you are, part of your self-concept, to be dishonest. This is why sometimes the first time you do something, it's really, really kind of difficult. Maybe you feel really bad. Like the first time, I'm using honesty a lot in this video. The first time you tell a lie, and maybe you feel really bad. And the second time you feel bad, but it's not as bad as the first. And then the third, you feel a little less bad. And after a while, you kind of start to realize, well, geez, I'm a liar. And it becomes easier and easier to lie. Easier and easier to be that. Sometimes people are rude or obnoxious to people, and somebody says, gosh, that was really rude. And they go, hey, I'm just being myself, just being who I am. No, you weren't born that way. You were born much more of a blank slate. But all of these behaviors, and it just kind of became like, this is my self-concept. This is just, you think you're just being yourself. Number 3, self is internal dialogue. Now, we have a lot of voices in our head. We talk to ourselves a lot. And these little voices, when we're talking to ourselves, we actually play different characters, different roles. Don't worry, it's natural. You're only crazy if you don't realize that all of those different people or characters are you. So for example, we have the teacher in us. The teacher in us is when you do something that you shouldn't have done or is a mistake, and you go, oh gosh, I'm never doing that again. Okay, don't do that. I don't know why I did it. Okay, this is the teacher. It's taking a lesson and saying, now we're going to apply that lesson into the future, into other circumstances. Then you have the coach. The coach is the one, like if you're going in for a big job interview and you start practicing in your mind, like, okay, they're probably going to ask this and here's how I'll answer that. Okay, this is the coach. The coach follows you all the way to, say, that big job interview. Says, just remember, when you walk in there, okay, Big deep breath, go in there, shake their hand, look them in the eyes when you shake their hand, smile, introduce yourself. You got this. You're going to be fine. You're going to be, okay, this is the coach, the motivator. You also have your parent self. Your parent self is kind of your conscience. When you do something that you know is wrong, you do it anyway, you get done, you go, gosh, I really shouldn't have done that. That was really, I shouldn't have done that. That's the parent role in yourself. You also have the friend. The friend is the one that takes your side. If somebody ever does something to you or is mean to you or whatever, and in your mind you start to hear yourself defending yourself, like you're driving down the street, somebody cuts you off, and when they cut you off, they flip you off. And you're like, what are you flipping me off for? You're the moron that doesn't know how to drive. Who are you talking to? They're in another car. They don't hear you. You're talking to yourself. There is a certain comfort that we get having ourselves be defended. And so if nothing else, our mind will do that for us. And that's the friend. So this internal dialogue, it's all you, but it's almost like you're playing different roles or characters. Well, one of the things this internal dialogue helps your brain with, or your mind with, is helping you determine who am I. So the internal dialogue, these roles or characters are kind of helping you understand who you are. Number 4, self is relational achievement. One of the easiest ways to understand this one is with the following quote. I see me as I see you see me. So I see myself in a way that I see you see myself. So for example, if I notice that a lot of people laugh at my jokes, I develop a sense of self that I'm funny. If I notice that a lot of people come to me for advice, then I come to believe that I'm wise, that I'm smart. If I notice that a lot of people just naturally follow me, I come to believe that I'm a leader, that I'm a good leader. So self is relational achievement. This is where we look to how other people perceive us to try to determine who am I? How do they see me? This is based on something called expectations theory, sometimes called expectancy theory, which is how I almost pronounce it. Expectancy theory is much more really a school of thought because there's a whole bunch of theories that fall into it. But the basic premise of this is that we look to the expectations of others to determine what we should be doing. What do they expect of us? That must be who I am. So if they expect me to get my homework done and to do really well, then I see myself as being, say, a good student. If they expect that my room is going to be clean, then I come to believe that I am a clean person, that I'm conscientious, that I'm a good worker, etc. Okay. Finally, number 5, self is cognitive schema. Now, we are constantly flooded with way too much information. And if we don't categorize that information, almost like a filing system, it's going to be very, very difficult to make sense of the world around us. So that's why in academia, we categorize things into subjects. You know, math, computer science, physics, communications, psychology, whatever. But then within each of those, like within communication, we break it down even more. So we've got interpersonal communication, group communication, organizational communication, public communication, mediated, etc. And so we're constantly kind of defining things in terms of categories or types. We do the same thing with people. So when we meet someone, we don't start with a blank slate. If we started with a blank slate on this person, if we made no assumptions about this person, we wouldn't have enough time to get to know anybody. Imagine if each time you met somebody, you had to ask yourself, is this somebody who eats other people? When this person talks, they're making sounds, but do they communicate through sound? And they're using sounds very similar to English, but maybe that's actually just happens to be the, how they cough. In other words, we have to make basic assumptions. If someone offers you a handshake, you have to kind of be able to interpret what that means based upon these assumptions, these expectations, or these categories that you have. This person is a person, and then we begin to typecast the person. So if you meet somebody and you find out, for example, that they're a football player. And maybe that's one of your typecasts. That's how you categorize people is say you have competitive and not competitive. When you meet somebody who's competitive, you have certain characteristics about that person. So you say, okay, they're competitive, therefore they probably have these characteristics. They probably like sports, for example. Then as you get to know them and you realize, okay, this characteristic doesn't apply to them, so I'm going to cross this one out for this person. Something unrelated, like, gosh, they actually also really like math. Okay, well, I don't have that as part of my athlete competitive typecast, but for this individual, I'm going to add that they like math. That's how we get to know people, is we start with basic assumptions. As soon as we get to know something about them, if that's part of our typecast, we put them in there, and then we modify the characteristics for that individual. So as a case in point. Now, we all categorize people differently, so this may not at all be the way that you categorize people. But we're going to use one from kind of the stereotypical high school, the cool kid club and the nerds. So let's say the cool kid club, you say, they dress in fashion, they tend to have more money, they're outgoing and extroverted, they like sports, they don't like math and computers and stuff like that. The nerds, maybe you say they're smart, they get good grades, they don't really dress in fashion, they like Dungeons and Dragons or whatever. So you got these elements to that. Then you meet somebody who's part of the cool kid club. So you put them in that cool kid club. So you assume that they like sports, that they've got money, that they are extroverted, etc. Then as you get to know them, you find out they really don't like sports. And their dad's making them play football. What they really like are computer games. So they love playing on the computer, they love Dungeons and Dragons, and stuff like that. So you begin to say, okay, so geez, it actually doesn't like sports. But you add they like computer games and they like math or Dungeons and Dragons or whatever. So each individual, we refine our understanding of that individual based upon what we know, what we learned. But we start with a typecast. So, self as cognitive schema, we do the same thing with ourselves. As we have different types of people in our mind, different categories, we put ourselves into one of those categories. So, for example, using the cool kid club and the nerds, let's say you define yourself as one of the nerds. And so you put yourself there. And then you just kind of start off with the assumption that you have certain characteristics. So if you notice, nerds really like this new video game. So you kind of default to, I'll try it out, thinking I might like it too. If you weren't in that category, you were in the cool kid club, you may never have even tried the video game. So you try it out. And then maybe find out, geez, I really don't like this game. So then it modifies the list for you. Now, cognitive schema oftentimes leads to life scripts. In a life script, let's say you get into high school and you get brought into the cool kid club, and then you find out certain things about the cool kid club, like we sit at a certain table during lunch and we listen to certain music and we go to the football games together and we like football and all of these things, you begin to kind of default to that is me too until it's shown otherwise. So we tend to follow life scripts a lot. If somebody we think is similar to us says, gosh, this movie is like the best movie ever, we're more inclined to say, gosh, I'll go watch it. That sounds great. If somebody is radically different from us, and they say this is the best movie ever, it's like, oh, I'm glad you like it. We're less likely to be as interested in it because we recognize them as not part of our category, our type. So these five together, all five of them, are ways that we can begin to build our sense of who we are. And also it allows us to somewhat defend that because media and outsiders are constantly trying to use these also to change who we are. So I have to apologize to you. I try to make these videos 10 to 15 minutes, and this video is now going close to 20. So I'm going to go ahead and wrap this up. That covers self-concept. If you have any questions, as always, please reach out to me. And as always, thank you very much for watching, and I will see you in the next video.